Hello, bookish friends. All right. I am still having like a lot of struggles with the mic situation. So, this video, I wanted to talk to you all about the best books I've read in 2021. I know that it is already 2022, but I did read like quite a few books last year. 125 is the number. That being said, small disclaimer, that's a ton of books, and by no means should anyone compare themselves to that number. Reading is like my number one pastime, and therefore, that's why I read so many. And we'll consider like market research, as I was really planning on being on BookTube and like talking about books, and so I wanted to make sure that I had plenty to talk about. So mission accomplished. I do have plenty to talk about. It was really hard narrowing them down. I am not a person who gives out like 5 stars off of like everything I read. It has to like really stand out to me. That being said, there are quite a few books that I rated 5 stars that did not make it onto this list. All of the books that I want to list on here, I feel like kind of represent certain parts of my reading that I wanted to like share with you all as well. So I don't want to narrow it down any further than the, I think, 17 books that I've picked. That being said, I am going to like piece out into chapters. So if you want to skip around, feel free. I am also like not going to give away any spoilers, although I will try and talk a little bit about what each of the books is about and like why I enjoyed it so much. Let's begin. I think that I'm just going to go in the order of like how I read them. I want to start off with the collection of letters, responses, called Tiny Beautiful Things, Advice on Love and Life, from Dear Sugar. And this is a collection of the letters and responses from an advice column on like love, life, relationships, personal growth. The column is like fairly old, and basically at the time it was anonymous. However, since the column has ended, the author has come forward as Cheryl Strayed, who's actually like a very popular and like well-known current like memoirist and novelist. So in the book, as she's answering people's questions, she's referring to the fact that she's a writer, and she did write like the introduction to the book that kind of explains like how she landed the column in the first place. I started off the year with this book, and it was just like such a great way to start. It's like uplifting, it's hopeful, it's very touching and like endearing. People are sharing their stories with her, and there's some from like, I feel like all kinds of people. Like there's even, I think, one from like a child, like, you know, like a teenager, like all the way up to people who are like having issues with their marriages, like much deeper like grief, like personal grief, like the loss of a parent, or, you know, like that kind of thing. And I think that she has great advice. She has like a kind of like tone that she like puts off. Memoirists having a certain like personality that they evoke when they, I don't know, that they kind of like put on in order to like sell themselves in a memoir, exaggerate certain parts of their life in order to like make it, I don't know, give a narrative about like to give a narrative about their life. And it was cool to see that focused purpose for like writing in this way. I don't know, it was just really great. I highly recommend it. And then the next book that I read, that I really enjoyed, I actually read this whole series this year, and this is the second one, and this is, I considered this one to be my favorite of the series. It was Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. And this is a part of the Cursebreaker series, the first one of which is A Curse So Dark and Lonely. And I read the first 2 of these immediately back to back, because I loved the first one so much, which was a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but with like kind of a modern twist. Beauty, quote, is a like a modern person, so it's kind of like an urban fantasy brought into a time period where there is a prince who is under a curse, and he has basically a season in which to find some random person from our current modern day and make them fall in love with him before he becomes a monster and basically destroys his entire kingdom. All of the destruction that happens is permanent, which is like really sad for him. And the only people who are immune to the curse are Ren, who's the prince himself, and his captain of the guard, whose name is Gray. And the second book focuses on Gray, like as a character. He gets like his own book, and it's great because he was amazing. And there is a new character that's introduced in this because the story, of course, broadens after the conclusion of, the Beauty and the Beast arc. So I read the first two, blew through them, and then I had to wait like the rest of the world until the release of the third book, which I also immediately bought and read as soon as I pretty much could. She actually has like a new series that's coming out that is going to also feature one of the minor characters from the second and third books, which is also cool as well. So, because I love companion novels, and now I get to read like more in the world, and it's so great. Next up is another book that I read the beginning of last year and loved. I've definitely seen a lot of people like talking about this since as well, which is so great because it's well-deserved praise. But it is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. And this book is a modern urban fantasy as well. Normal girl who is part of like an early acceptance program to a Southern college. So, but she's young. She's like 17 or 18. And when she goes there, she is swept up into a kind of like secret organization that exists that's based off of like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. There are living descendants of all of the Knights of the Round Table who basically exist to protect the world like from, like the dark demon underworld. She is immediately drawn to a few of the characters in the book who are part of the secret organization. And although she is not like immediately accepted as like a member, she knows of its existence, which is more than she already should. And she has like some secret magical past of her own that kind of like comes to light as you continue reading the book. And there is also like some of her own like personal past mysteries that she's like trying to determine as well. One of them is like the mysterious death of her mother, which was like an accidental kind of out of the blue type situation that she has not like felt any closure from. I am very excited for the new book of this series, which I think is coming out towards the end of like 2022. It makes me want to read like more King Arthur inspired books as well, because I realized that although I know kind of like the basics and like the story of Camelot, I like don't really know a lot of like the legendary like background so much as I do like classic Greek mythology. Next, The Binding by Bridget Collins. And okay, this is a magical realism book that I really just loved. I kind of read like a fair amount of magical realism this last year when I need a break from like the crazy fantasy, like world building, like extravaganza plot dumps that happen. It's just like so refreshing to read something that is still magical, but just like way easier. You get like some really interesting like character development and really intriguing parallels and like ways to discuss like modern issues, but just in like a very fantastical way. This is basically a story that takes place in an older version of like Europe or like Great Britain, some like English society. The main magical thing is that people's memories can be bound inside of books by like a special community member who's like able to perform like the binding. People can have their memories taken from their brain, essentially, so they no longer remember them, and have them put inside of a book. There are some politics around the role of the binder. Like, are they doing it as a service to the person, or are they doing it for profit? The main character, who realizes that he is meant to be a binder because he has this special gift, but he only realizes that because he himself is actually, or someone had attempted to have his memories bound, and as a result, it like made him really sick, and the binding did not work, and he is slowly remembering the things that he was supposed to have forgotten, and he is struggling with like figuring out what to do because there's another person involved in these memories and they do not remember. It's a great imaginative exploration of like the power of books. And who doesn't like a book about book lovers? Next, I have another one who was a new to me author as well, which is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And this is a kind of Greek mythology inspired literary fiction book that was just so atmospheric and fabulous. This book follows the main character, who goes by Piranesi, but mainly just because he cannot remember his other name. And he is trapped inside of a labyrinth, which he refers to as the house. You learn that it is kind of open air place with like columns and like vestibules, lots of hallways. And he has a great understanding of all of the rooms of the house, which ones will be underwater due to like floods from like a nearby ocean, and kind of the movement of like birds and things that come through. And there are a few other humans that he knows of, other people, some of them dead, some of them alive. And basically he's keeping track of everything inside of his notebooks. And he speaks a lot with one person who is not always around in the labyrinth in the house, but he comes to visit, and he's always asking Piranesi for like more specifics about the house and like various parts of it and like how to get to various parts. Piranesi has all of these like memory gaps. He wants to know why he doesn't remember like so many things. You're starting to uncover like his past at the same time as he is. The perspective of it is like very good. I love the writing style of the book. I love how everything is from his perspective. And so things that we kind of take for granted as like knowing what they are, because he has like lots of memory gaps, like you're getting his perspective and like not knowing necessarily what they are, which is also cool. He presents himself as being like a very analytical person, which is also really like fun to read because it ends up being like kind of scientific, even though it's like not a scientific book. It's very much like an imaginative story, but that's also like a really cool dichotomy. I don't know any person in like my actual life who have read this book, mainly because I have not yet encountered someone who I think would like really appreciate it. I really want someone to read this so that I can talk to them about it. Next, are you noticing that I actually own a lot of these books? It's because these are the books that I read them and I loved them so much that I like immediately went out and bought them. So next I want to talk about lore. So this book is by Alexandra Bracken, who I've read like a few of her other books as well. And this one just like blew me away. So it is young adult, but it definitely is more complex. So not necessarily that like there's things that are like more adult in it, just that it took a lot to read. This is Greek mythology inspired. It's not a retelling, but it's based on mythology. This is another urban fantasy. Wow, I'm sensing a trend here. I didn't realize I liked urban fantasy so much, but apparently I do. Maybe only well done ones. So basically this is about a girl who has been trying to distance herself from her past, or her her hereditary inclusion. 7-year occurring games, like Olympic Games kind of, where all of the people who are descendant of the great heroes of ancient Greece basically compete to kill some of the gods who are made mortal for like I think it's 1 week. And if one of the heroes, one of the hero families, manages to kill them, the leader of that family like becomes the new god. And then, like 7 years later, they're the ones that are getting hunted. The main girl, her entire family has been wiped out during one of these games because obviously they're very competitive. And you kind of get the impression that like her house would have been like very powerful if they had managed to live, because each of the families also has one of, I don't know, like an ancient relic that only they are able to use. And her relic is the Aegis. I hope I don't butcher that, but it's basically the sword with like the head of Medusa on it. Hence this cover photo that kind of looks like Medusa's face. One of the gods, Athena, basically comes to her, begs her to like bind her life so that she is saved, in like the hopes that together they'll be able to like bring down the family that killed her family. It's just like, it's very confusing having to kind of like keep all of the families straight while also keeping their patron gods straight and the gods that are a part of the games. There is like a romance in it. It's a lot of discussion about like revenge and like, is it worth it? Like not being able to like run away from your past, not being able to run away from your destiny. I would probably like reread this again, honestly. Another reason why I wanted to like buy it as well, because I think the first time I was reading it, there was just like so much going on that it was, I feel like I would appreciate knowing where it was going, like when I read it as well. So I'll probably give this a reread at some point in the, I don't know, next couple of years. All right. Next, I have The Wicked King, which I did splurge and buy like the fancy Barnes & Noble edition of this. I did like hunt down used copies just because I love like the black cover like so much more than the white ones. Another situation where I actually liked the second book of the series the most. That's not normally my thing. A lot of me proving myself wrong with these books. I read this entire series this year as well. Because I'm obsessive, and if I like something and it's already, all of them are out and easy to read because they're only like 300 pages, apparently I just blow through them. So I read The Cruel Prince. I enjoyed it. I read Wicked King, and I loved it like so much more. The main character, like our MC, was just like, she kind of like came into her own in this second book. Like she was great in the first book, and I could tell that she was like just, I don't know, she's like ready to like jump into everything, and then she just like blew me away in the second book. And the third book was like good, but it was just, I don't know, it was a little fast for me. It felt a little rushed, like it was like trying to do too many things at once. I probably would have appreciated like 4 books as opposed to 3. For people who do not know, this is definitely like a very hyped series, so I feel a little bit bad talking about it because I could be like a broken record. But basically it's an enemies to lovers type book where this girl, Jude, her oldest sister, not her twin, her oldest sister is part fairy. And at the beginning of the book, she talks about how her half-sister's fairy father basically came and killed her parents like when she was young, and wanted to take the daughter, her sister, back to the land of fairy, to like his house. Because he killed her parents, he also took her twin and herself like with her half sister, and she was raised in the realm of fairy, being a human. So she always has like kind of like her guard up, because these fairies are the mischievous and slightly evil kind of fairies, as opposed to like the happy, like friendly Disney type fairies. There's a lot of like court politics. Her I don't know, stepfather, foster father, for like lack of a better term, he is the captain of like the guard she's basically just like trying to find ways to protect herself. So she wants to like get a good position like as a member of the Royal Guard. She wants to learn how to fight using swords, like all of these kinds of things. She's just trying to like protect herself. And she becomes just like such a great adversary to all the people who are like trying to vie for power in this like cool book. But also I love politics in books, especially like in fantasy stuff. So it was just it was exactly what I was looking for, and I can see why people really like this series. Next, I have Fire, which was a reread for me actually. So this is a book that's part of the Graceling Realm trilogy. It used to be a trilogy. I read these back when I was in high school, and this year the author actually came out and released a fourth book that happens like sometime after, I think like 7 or 8 or 9 years after the events of the third book. So the series is a companion novel series where each one follows like one main character. And the new fourth book basically is another book about the character from the third one. So, of course, when they released it, obviously I forgot like all of them. And so I was like, oh, in order to like read this fourth book, I have to reread the first 3, even though I've already read them. And it was a great like foray into my past. I really enjoyed it. I do like rereading things. I feel like I often get caught up in I don't know, like wanting to read new stuff, and I don't know, there's just so many books out there. It's hard to like go back and use up some of my time reading stuff I've already read. Now that I'm older and wiser, or like have more experience, I'm like, do I still like this as much? But the first time I read the series, I remember liking this book the most. And now that I know myself more, it makes a lot more sense why I liked this one so much. And it's because I think, honestly, because there is a ton of politics in this book, which I already know, that I just said it, how much I love like politics in books that are fantasy. And this character, like the love interest, is a second son prince who is the captain of like the army, which is also like I don't know, my favorite type of like male hero, male romantic lead. Is like the person who has power thrust upon them unwillingly and is also just a really great ruler because of it. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense now, knowing myself, why I loved this book like as a child. And it was just like little me didn't know how much I would love all of these tropes when I got older. But here we are. This one is still my favorite of the series, although I have to say I did really like the newest book. I think it added like so much to the story, because I also really remember not enjoying specifically like the way that the series ended, like in Bitter Blue, which is the third book. And it was just like so great getting a new ending. I didn't actually talk about what this book was about. But basically, to give you like a short overview, in the Graceling realm, there are basically people who, when you are born with 2 different color eyes, actually it can happen like until you're, I don't know, like age 7 or something. Eventually, at some point, you might develop 2-tone eyes, and this means that you have a grace. And graces can be anything from like being really good at cooking to, you know, I don't know, having great military strategy. In some realms, this means that you are a social pariah. In other realms, it means that you become like the kings. So all of the kids who develop graces are basically brought to the castle, and from there, the king decides like if they are useful or not. And if he wants to keep them, then they become like basically his soldiers. There's a lot of politics between the different realms. It's one of those books that like has a map in the beginning, and it's actually helpful to look at the map because there's a lot going on like between the different areas. Fire actually takes place like quite a few years like before the events in Graceling, so it's kind of cool because it's like a prequel series. I feel like I am just really going for it with the time here. The next book I want to talk about is Sisters of the Winter Wood, which was a kind of atmospheric fairy tale. I don't want to say magical realism in this case, but possibly. This story, I want to say it bears a lot of resemblance to the Swan and the Bear like folk tale, but I think it also has a lot of Swan Lake. I feel like it has a lot of like similarities to that as well. It's about these two sisters who are in a place that like is kind of like, I want to say like Russia, in like 1800s maybe, in like a rural area. Fiddler on the Roof type vibes, like where they are Jewish, and because of that there's like a lot of tension with like between them and like other members of the village. I'm struggling to like explain this in a way that is succinct. The story is written from each of the sisters' perspectives, one of them kind of like representing or like being represented by a swan. So she's like more like flighty, more fantastical, like her head is kind of like in the clouds. She's like more whimsical. She kind of like follows her like feelings or her emotions, as opposed to the other sister who's like more quote like bear, and she's like more steadfast, loyal, strong, reliable. She kind of like is more pragmatic. The thing I loved most about this book is that the sister who's like more like the swan, her story is written in verse. Her chapters are written in verse, whereas the sister who's more like the bear, her story is written in like prose. So as you're flipping through the chapters, you're like switching between prose and verse, and it was such a unique thing that I've literally never seen before. And it was so, it just created this like environment that was very like transportive. It definitely like made it very fairy tale-ish. And it was great. I am also realizing that while I do love fairy tale retellings, I feel like there's this whole genre of people who are kind of creating their own fairy tales based off of all of these elements that we recognize as being fairy tale-esque, but they have their own message that they're trying to like create, and they're kind of like borrowing from like various folklore elements and kind of like crafting this like unique thing that's like dark and mysterious and full of like morals and messages about, in this case, like sisterhood and family, belonging, relationships that are solid and like help you grow, as opposed to like intoxicating, and like filled with desire that's like false. Oh God, it was just so good. It was really, really good. And this is another one. I don't know anyone else that has read this. And so I'm just, I want more people to read it because I just thought it was like very, very well done. The next one I want to talk about, I also don't have. And this was Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Booley. This book was I want to say young adult thriller. This one I know is going to be made a movie. It's about a girl who gets pulled into an FBI investigation when a tragedy befalls her within the first, like, I don't know, 30 to 50 pages of the book, which I don't want to spoil what it was. But basically, she witnesses some kind of tragedy, something that's close to her. She gets pulled into an FBI investigation, and it has to do with some kind of plant-based mushroom type drug that's being like laced into other like pharmaceuticals. And they've basically traced it back to her area, part of an Indian reservation or Native American reservation in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's a lot about family. There's a lot about different class structure. She identifies as like biracial. Part of her family is white and rich, and then another part of her family is Native American. Her father has died when she was like younger, and she has like a half brother that she has like a decent relationship with, who's also like a central part of the story. There's just so many layers to this book, which is really great, and I just like loved the ending so much. It's just really nice to see a debut novel like be so well received, and also just like so like deserving of that praise. Next, I have other series that I am completely in love with as well. And so I actually don't have the first one on hand because I have lent it out. But I do have the second one, which is Flamefall. But the first one is Fireborn, and the second one is Flamefall. And it's part of the Fireborn trilogy. This is a political fantasy. It's very political, not as much fantasy. There is no magic necessarily, but there are dragons and there are bonds of some characters to the dragons. But aside from that, it's like not very fantasy-ish. And I feel like I want people to know that ahead of time, because if that would hold you back from reading this book, I don't want it to. Because it is literally so good. Loosely based on the Russian Revolution, I would say. Inspired by the Russian Revolution, this story follows the rebuilding of a nation, or a nation that has experienced its own revolution, where the intelligentsia class has risen up and killed the noble ruling class, or exiled the few that survived. And they have now instituted a civil service examination, where they're creating a new social order that's supposedly based on merit as opposed to, or intellect as opposed to noble blood. And the story follows two main characters, Leo and Antigone. Leo is, you learn, although he's presenting himself as an orphan, he is actually the seventh son of the primary ruling family, who was supposed to have died but was spared at the beginning. And so he has kind of started over, and he and Antigone's family was killed as a direct result of the noble family trying to assert their power. Both of them have now tested into the highest tier of the new order, which means that they are going to be the protectors of the realm and given the new generation of dragons, which will be used to protect the city. And at the start of Fireborn, the ruling class exiles from the first regime have decided, now that the youngest people are now of an age that they can fight, they're going to try and attack and take back what was theirs. And so now the new protectors are going to have to defend their place. But this book is so good. I can't describe to you how amazing it is. The characters will literally tear you apart. There's romantic moments, but they're so slow burn and layered with so much complexity, will break your heart. I cried so much while reading these books, and I put off reading the second one for so long because I couldn't bear the thought of having to wait an entire over a year until the third book comes out. But eventually I broke down and I read it anyway, and now I still have to wait a while until the next one, which I think is coming out maybe in the summer. Next I have completely different vibe. People We Meet on Vacation, which was amazing. I don't read contemporary romance at all. I barely read it. I started reading a few this year just because I don't know, I wanted to diversify. It was the summertime and I was like, why not? I'll dip my toe in some fun and flirty times. Okay, this book was so good. It was just so cute. I can't. So this is basically the story of Alex and Poppy, who are kind of an opposites attract, friends from college, boy-girl friendship that at this point has spanned 10 or 12 years. They aren't always able to hang out as much as they used to back when they were in college, because they're dating other people, they don't live in the same place anymore, but they always come together every year to do one big trip. And originally the trip was them kind of cutting corners and living it up on the cheap because they were college students. But now Poppy has basically turned her career into like being a travel blogger for a like higher class company. So she's like living her dream life. But she's found something is missing. You know what I mean? It's like she is at the top of her game, and she's like, you know what? This just doesn't feel as great as I thought it was going to be. Like to achieve all my dreams. Don't we all have that problem? However, then she starts to think that like one of the things that's like missing from her life is while she's going on all these great vacations, she has kind of like fallen out with her best friend, Alex. So she kind of like reaches out to him, and she decides to take a vacation, which she hasn't done in actual like terms of her taking time off of work. And she kind of like gets last minute invited to Alex's brother's wedding. And so she's like, what if we make a trip out of it? So she gets back in contact with him. They're going to do like one last trip, or one other trip that's like in the spirit of like what brought them together in the first place. But they have some weirdness because of this fight that they had that we figure out what it's about later on. But basically the book is told like in the present day, and then there are flashes back to all of the various trips out of order. Next, another book that I own but don't currently have because I've lent it out, Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I read this book. I know that like a million other people have also talked about how amazing this book was. It was my first Sally Rooney book that I read. And I could say I'm happy that I started with this one just because I loved it like so much. And it means that I will probably continue to read more of her books in the future. Basically follows like three friends, two women like primarily who are best friends from college, and have been roommates. They mainly interact like through email exchange like throughout the book. But basically Eileen is a girl who works at like a literary magazine. Her sister's getting married. She's like kind of just broken up with a like long-term boyfriend. So she's like feeling, I don't know, disillusioned with her life. Classic, millennial stuff. She feels lost, emotionally stunted. She doesn't like her job. Like this kind of thing. Yeah. Definitely relatable for like a lot of people. And then her friend Alice, who is, much more professionally in like a better place. She's like a famous author, very successful, but has had like a recent stay in a hospital due to like some kind of mental breakdown. And the two of them are, like interacting with each other, but there seems to be like some kind of tension between the two of them. And it's just like a great story about like relationships between friends, relationships between people that you're dating, like romantic relationships, what's said versus like what's meant, what is not said. It was just really great. And since then, I feel like I've talked about this book with like so many people who have read it, and there's new things to say with like every single conversation. And I feel like that is the mark of like a really great book. Next up, we have let's see, Under the Whispering Door, another magical realism book because apparently that is what I love. So I read both of TJ Klune's newish books this year. I read The House in the Cerulean Sea and also Under the Whispering Door just like a month later or so when it came out. I think I liked this one more, hence why it's on this list and The House in the Cerulean Sea is not. It was a slower start for me. However, I ended up liking it more, I would say. It's just really refreshing, I feel like, to read such a book that's like filled with so much hope and like lighthearted like love and like just good feelings. Like I don't read this kind of book very often either. I'm just like a really dark reader a lot of the time. It's like very refreshing to read something that makes you like feel warm and fuzzy at the end of it. Although it does deal with some dark stuff. This book basically starts with the main character whose name is Wallace, I want to say. Yes, Wallace. Wallace dies in the beginning of the book. And he dies suddenly. So when he arrives, or when a Reaper arrives to like come collect him, he doesn't understand what's happening. He thinks it's a joke. He is convinced that he doesn't belong like where she's going or where she's taking him. But it's okay because he is being taken to a tea shop where all of his questions will be answered and he will have time to adjust to the fact that he is dead. And he's allowed to stay there until he is ready to move on to what is next. And I think that one of the main parts I really liked about this book is that like they didn't really go into like what is next. You know what I mean? It had like great messages about death and it suggested that there might be more. It just kind of left to the imagination or like what you want to interpret it as, which I really liked. There is a person who runs the tea shop who is human, whose name is Hugo. And the character Wallace, who is like not a great person in real life, basically has like a newfound family at the tea shop and basically connecting with all of these people in a way that he was unable to connect to anyone in his real life allows him to like confront a lot of aspects of his past. And when he is given only 7 days, basically left before he is required to move on, there's like this new sense of urgency about like what he must do with the time he has left. It was slower to get into because the House on Cerulean Sea, I feel like, had this lightness because of all of the young characters. The way that they were talking, like they had like a lot of humor that like they imposed like into the story that didn't exist in this one. So it made it like a little bit hard for me to get into. However, yeah, this one was just like the ending was so good. And that is the last of the books that I currently own. So an ending in a way. Then next, I have When the Moon Was Ours by Anna Maria McLemore. And this book is another like weird fantasy-ish magical realism book that basically brings in a lot of folklore from Mexican culture. And so basically there is this girl who doesn't remember like her past necessarily. She just kind of like arrives mysteriously through the water. So she kind of like in the very beginning of the book, she falls out of a water tower as like the preface. And she's kind of like a curiosity to everyone because she has these roses that like grow out of her wrists that are tied to how she is feeling. She doesn't necessarily always want people to see them because they kind of like are an extension of like herself or her like things that she's like trying to protect about herself or like guard. Her first friend is this boy, Sam, who, you know, like is eventually like her neighbor. And he has a secret of his own as well. The story kind of starts, so that was like the preface. And then the story starts with the two of them taking their friendship kind of like to the next level and, you know, like expressing like their romantic interest in each other and how that kind of like changes like it changes their relationship. And it changes the power that they have over each other in the sense that there is this like villainous group of sisters that basically want to use the main character. They want to use her roses for like their magical powers that are supposed to like make boys fall in love with you. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining this. You definitely should read the author's note at the end as well. The author had like a reason for telling this story, and knowing that like made it all the more meaningful. It was just really, really cute. And very hopeful as well. Do you want to be in it? I only have one more left to talk about. All right, last up, Just Last Night by Yuri McFarlane. Okay, so this book was another one that I guess could be considered like a contemporary romance book. Although it had a lot more to do with like this like main character's like complete life and like her friendships as well. So like there was a romance that was part of it, but it was definitely not like the central part of the book. I definitely don't want to say too much about this book because the back of the book blurb kept things like very vague, and I appreciate the fact that like I did not know what was happening like when I picked up the book. This is a story of a girl who is very close with three of her friends. Her best friend, who is a girl, she's known her like her entire life, like since like grade school or whatever. And her, then they basically took on like a group or a duo of like a gay boy and a straight boy. So one of them, there's kind of romantic tension with. So that's relevant to the book. And yeah, they, like you can't make new old friends. So that is basically like the motto of the book, if I had to say. So it's like when you have this much history, like with a group of friends, they have kind of like become their own unit, and it may be like a substitute or like a fallback, and a reason that like their other relationships like have not succeeded. But basically there is like a tragedy that befalls the main character like within the first little part of the book. And the rest of the book is kind of like them, all the secrets that come to light in like this new heightened atmosphere. It's British, it's witty, it's sarcastic. There's like great humor if you're like very into that like dry, kind of morbid, like sense of humor with that I am. And it was just really great. It was one of the very last books I read of the year. And I just really loved it. So it was a great win for like the end of the year as I was like trying to get to like the rest of my goal. This was a very long video. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to cut it down. But hopefully you know a little bit more about me and my reading taste after listening to this. And I look forward to finding ways to bring up all of these books in future videos and some other ones that I read during the year as well. Sadly did not make the list. Okay. Signing off. And I'll see you next week.